So with the Star Trek Discovery news that we've been covering at Midnight's Edge, news has come recently about the settlement in the lawsuit brought by CBS against Alec Peters, the man behind the Star Trek fan film Axanar. Now, if you haven't seen Prelude to Axanar, I highly recommend it. I'll put a link in the description so you can check it out later. Now, first, I want to preface my remarks by saying I don't personally know Alec Peters. I've never had any dealings with him. I have no dog in this fight. If you have any issues with Mr. Peters, that is between you and him, and it is not part of this discussion. However, it seems that any mention of the Axanar lawsuit draws instant criticism and elicits a strong response. I recently had a back and forth on Twitter when I mentioned that with Star Trek Discovery's casting of Jason Isaacs and CBS not using the Garth of Izar story, that the whole Axanar lawsuit appeared to be a waste of time. These comments seem to draw some harsh criticism. Now, we don't know what the storyline of Discovery will be yet, and it could very well be they're using that story arc in the future. We simply do not know. And whatever someone's personal feelings about Alec Peters are, that is completely and utterly beside the point. This is not a discussion about the man or his motivations, nor is it my intention to discuss whatever personal grievances one may have against him. One of the criticisms, however, of anyone who seems to land on the side of the Axanar film, that you are automatically in the wrong and don't understand how copyrights work. This idea is quite to the contrary. And while the law may be on CBS and Paramount's side, I don't happen to think that Paramount and CBS are completely in the right in this case. Here's the thing. To a certain degree, I acknowledge that copyrights serve their purpose. Just for the sake of discussion, let's say there were no copyrights on Batman. That means anybody could use the character. There would be thousands of Batman cartoons, comics, toys, coloring books, movies, and there would be very little quality control on any of them, which would mean most of them would be terrible. It would also mean that it would be impossible for fans to sift through the thousands upon thousands of Batman-related products to get to the ones that actually are good. It would also mean that the value of the character would be diluted, and anyone who worked on legit Batman products wouldn't get paid for their time and their hard work. All of this would result in market saturation, and everyone would suffer. It's much better that we have one Batman. That way there's no confusion and fans would actually benefit from it in terms of better quality storytelling and products. So in that sense, copyrights can be a good thing. With that being said, I do, however, think that CBS was rather short-sighted in suing Alec Peters over Axanar and claiming copyright violation, and here's why. I'm not exactly the biggest fan of CBS, but while I do acknowledge they have the right to protect their intellectual property, I have to ask one question. Why now? Star Trek has had a long history of fans making their own films, stretching all the way back to 1973. That was when a man from Michigan named John Constantino financed completely out of his own pocket the feature film Paragon's Paragon. If you've never seen it, you can check out clips on YouTube. And even though it's crude and rather amateurish, one does have to admire the dedication and commitment that Mr. Constantino had to the series, and the willingness not to just sit back and consume, but to actually create something. And for that, he is to be commended. Over the years, there have been a number of Star Trek-related fan films, some even featuring original cast members reprising their roles from the original series. One, Star Trek Renegades, was a fan-made pitch for a new series that featured Star Trek Voyager's Robert Picardo and Tim Russ, and original series cast member Walter Koenig. CBS declined to pick up the series, and the content had to be altered with a new set of fan film guidelines that CBS had laid down for fans to adhere to. Guidelines that seemingly were designed to put the kibosh on any future fan film productions. But between that first fan film and Axanar, something happened. First was that CBS and Paramount seemed to have done everything they can to effectively hamper what was one of the most beloved pop culture institutions ever known. After 4 seasons, Enterprise was canceled by UPN in 2005, a decision that was said to have been made personally by now CEO of CBS, Les Moonves. That left the franchise effectively in limbo. Many projects, including a new prequel film, Star Trek The Beginning, failed to get off the ground, and the future of Star Trek at its 40th anniversary in 2006 looked bleak. But in 2006, former Paramount executive Gail Berman convinced the studio to make a new film. And in 2007, principal photography began on the J.J. Abrams reboot simply titled Star Trek, featuring a new and younger cast and a rebooted timeline. The new film did well enough to make a sequel, Star Trek Into Darkness. That film, however, wasn't released in theaters until nearly 4 years later, effectively killing the momentum the new series had built for itself. Another problem was the veil-thin revelation that Sherlock star Benedict Cumberbatch was actually playing Khan Noonien Singh, which was one of the worst-kept secrets of that summer. Into Darkness opened at $13.5 million at the box office, significantly lower than its predecessor, which had a $30 million opening. Deadline.com estimates that when all was said and done, Into Darkness only made approximately $29.5 million total. That, however, was the least of Paramount and CBS's problems. According to The Wrap, market research indicated that there was brand confusion when it came to the rebooted Star Trek merchandise and the original series merchandise. Cinema Blend also claims that Abrams wanted CBS and Paramount to stop selling merchandise based on the original series. Abrams wanted to avoid confusion and thereby set up his own multi-platform Star Trek universe, which would include comics, television shows, and digital entertainment. There was, however, a problem. While the rights to the Star Trek films are held by Paramount, CBS actually controls the rights to the television series as well as the merchandising rights. This led to CBS and Abrams clashing over which elements from the original series he could and could not use. Apparently, things had reached a boiling point and Abrams was said to have literally given up. Some believe that this is what factored into his decision to work on Star Wars: The Force Awakens rather than a third Star Trek film. Approximately 2 months before Star Trek Beyond was to premiere was when CBS and Paramount decided to lower the boom on Axanar. When Star Trek Beyond finally hit theaters, the film underperformed in the US as well as overseas. Only taking in an estimated $343 million at the box office, it needed an estimated $340 to $345 million just to break even. All of this leads up to one very important point. While I do acknowledge that CBS does have the right to protect their intellectual property, it has taken them over 40 years to do so. The difference is now, from John Constantino's film Paragon's Paragon up until recently, fan films have had a very amateur quality to them. But what's happened in that time is the world has seen many technological advancements and innovations in terms of computer and digital technology. When George Lucas made The Phantom Menace in 1999, only he and a few others had access to things like digital cameras and non-linear editing. Now they're in the hands of everybody. A halfway decent digital camera will run you as little as $500. Adobe After Effects will run you about $230. And editing software like Adobe Premiere will run you about $240. PC maker Dell will even throw in a basic version of Premiere for $79. The total startup costs as far as tech is concerned without getting into building of sets and costumes is under $1,000. And there's even ways to get those costs down even further. For this video, I'm using a software package that I purchased at Best Buy for $50, and the recording software only cost me about $60. A company called Edit Share even offers a free version of their video editing software called Lightworks, which is a more basic version of a program used to edit many feature films. And Apple includes GarageBand and iMovie on every new Mac you buy. With the open source software Blender, 3D ship modeling software costs have been reduced from over $1,400 a year for something like Autodesk Maya to zero. The ability to make high quality looking films has now been democratized. And much like the music industry that decided to sue its fans back in the early 2000s, Hollywood is desperately trying to put the genie back into the bottle. Also consider that many fans aren't very happy with the current direction of Star Trek. Despite having a solid performance with the first installment of the J.J. Abrams reboot, each successive film has had diminishing returns at the box office. And it's not just fans that are unhappy. In 2003, video game publisher Activision, who at the time held the Star Trek video game license, sued Paramount for allowing the franchise to stagnate. And more recently, with Star Trek's 50th anniversary having just recently passed, it seems CBS was content to take the year off. No TV specials, no retrospectives. Bupkis. Apart from a marathon on BBC America and one mention on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, the 50th anniversary of one of pop culture's most revered franchises came and went with hardly a notice. By comparison, when the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who and James Bond arrived, you could hardly swing a dead cat without bumping into something Doctor Who or James Bond related. Seriously though, don't go swinging dead cats, that's just wrong. Which brings me to my second point. If you have a property that's clearly as beloved and lucrative as Star Trek, then you should do something with it. CBS seems to believe that it could just pull the series out of mothball anytime it wants, slap a Star Trek label on whatever, and then sit back and say, good enough, and watch the money roll in. Well, that's not good enough anymore. Fans are becoming more and more discerning and will outright reject something that they feel isn't up to high standards. And now with the internet, there's more communication between fans that wasn't present even a mere 20 years ago. And some of those fans, not being merely content to just sit on the couch and consume, will take matters into their own hands. The times clearly have changed. Now, some would say to this clear lack of franchise maintenance on the part of Paramount and CBS, if you have a car that you don't drive, would you let someone else drive it? To that I say, if you have a car that you care about, you should at least change the oil every 3,000 miles. But now, CBS seems content to just sit on the Star Trek franchise and underutilize it. So it comes as no surprise, with these tools being as accessible as they are, that someone would pick them up and do a better job than they have. CBS could have handled this situation much better than it did. Peters could have been allowed to finish his film, and then if they wanted to just buy it outright from him. This is my own personal opinion, but the real problem wasn't that Peters was infringing on their copyright. It was that his quote-unquote amateur production was more well-received than a $100 million motion picture from supposed professionals. Considering the long history of Star Trek fan films, as long as the Golden Goose was laying plenty of eggs for everyone, there was no problem. Now that CBS has decided not to feed it, the goose is starting to come up dry. And with the advent of technology and the Star Trek film franchise running into more turbulence than in the Mutara Nebula, it was only a matter of time before somebody was going to be made an example of. The dice just happened to land on Alec Peters this time. And once again, an industry overcorrects by suing the very people whom they need the most. Its fans. See you next time.
Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the Mets are gonna kick in. My